Hello YouTube. This is a high definition review of the Sega CD32X. You can see here this is the Sega 32X, Sega Genesis, and Sega CD. This is all the hardware combined. Now, in this review, I'm going to kind of go over, what Sega's vision was, and what their mistakes were, along with the review of the Sega 32X, basically, along with the rest of the hardware here. It does use the same controller. I kind of got the cord wrapped up there, but they do recommend to use the 6-button controller with the 32X just because it's a little bit easier with some of the games. And if you're playing games like Mortal Kombat 2, then you'll get better. It's easier to do like fatalities and stuff like that. Now, if you're sorry about the camera there. Apologize about the quality. Now, if you're playing a CD32X game, it basically works the same way as a Sega CD game. It's just a 32-bit game rather than a 16-bit. Now, I will comment on one thing. This did come with the original box, and it kind of see it there, but it actually is bigger than what it looks. Come back down here to the hardware. As you can see, it's got a Genesis game in it right now. It doesn't add any more ports or anything like that to the system. It is an add-on, and it does require its own power supply. It does not work with the power converter for the Master System games, but it will play 32-bit games, and it will play Sega games. And I got a few Sega 32X games here, and this is Doom, and I'm not very pleased with the 32X games. You can see they're just a little bit different than a standard Genesis game there. Kind of hold it side by side, see the difference there. But I'm not too pleased with them, and the reason why is because none of them are full screen, and they're not widescreen. They're not really, neither resolution, so they kind of stand out, and to put them on a widescreen or a full screen TV, either one, you get the bars at the top on any TV you put them on. It's like they were made in 50 hertz and that they were converted over to 60 hertz, which I find that very strange because, believe it or not, the Sega 32X is the only hardware that was developed in the United States as for video game hardware. And believe it or not, it actually was. So you would think that the games would be made in 60 hertz, but they act like they're made in 50 hertz and that they're being run on 60 hertz. So I don't know, but none of the games I have take the whole screen, and they're not widescreen either, so they don't look that good. Especially Doom. Doom uses the full screen, but the gameplay is, you got this basically small box that your game plays in. It's ridiculous. I mean, you look at any other version of Doom, and it takes the whole screen. I mean, you get this big, screen of gameplay. I mean, look at the Saturn version. Okay, the Saturn version, you get the whole screen. It looks really good. 64, Doom 64, it's the same way. Doom for the Dreamcast, it's all the same way. So I mean, to sit there and just to say that the games are bad, you can't really say that unless you can describe why. But that's the reason why. Now the way this hooks up, it has a conversion cable. Even though it sits down in the Genesis, it has a cable out the back. Now one end has this big round end. It looks almost like it would have a breakaway fuse or something. Now I don't know what that is in there, but that end needs to be plugged into the Genesis itself, and then the regular end plugs into the 32X. It's pretty dummy proof. It can only go one way. Now, it'll plug in either way, but it'll only work one way. So it's kind of dummy proof. Which I don't know why it only work one way, but it just does. Now, the FCC states on these that it'll tip over, it's unstable. But as you can see here, it don't look like it's going to tip over. It seems pretty stable to me. Now with the regular Genesis, that might be the case with it, because if you have the Model 1 Sega CD and a Model 1 Sega Genesis and then the 32X on there, well, the Model 1 Sega CD sits underneath the Model 1 Genesis, so everything is just stacked. Okay, the taller you get, next thing you know, the thing's getting top heavy. So yeah, that might be true on that one, but this one's nice and sturdy. I do like that. You know, it doesn't add headphone jacks to any of them. It is not compatible with the third version of Genesis. Now, I have heard in some cases there is a mod you can do that will make it work with a Sega Genesis 3rd edition, but I would not recommend it because 1, you're hacking on your system, 2, reduces the value of the system, and 3, the Genesis 3 is really small, and to put the 32X on there, it makes it very unstable because the 32X is like twice the size of the Genesis itself, so it's not recommended. If you notice, it does look a lot like the Model 2 Genesis. I mean, it looks like it would fit perfect for it. So, it still only has 2 controller slots. There's nothing new there. You know, everything else is pretty much the same. This one is a little bit noisy, so I might send it to an electronics shop and see about getting that fixed. But I heard they got these capacitors that are like that big around in there, or it's got one and it's supposed to take care of the noise. But this one's got the black one, and from what I've heard, some of them have the blue ones, and the one with the blue ones are the quiet ones. So I've used a quiet one, and it worked great. And I was hoping that this one was quiet, but it's not. So anyway. Now, what I want to mention is Sega's vision and the issues they had. Sega's vision was to create one system. That was a CD and cartridge-based system, but it was going to be a 32-bit, and they sort of did. They created the Sega CDX, which is like a portable Sega CD and Genesis. But it didn't have the 32X part of it built in. So it would play the Genesis games and the Sega CD games, but it wouldn't play any 32-bit games, any 32X. Now with a special spacer, this particular spacer does not work with the CDX, but they do have one that does, and it is required to use a 32X with it. Now they were going to make a Sega Genesis with the Sega 32 built in, but it wasn't going to have the CD. So they never even got into development with one basic system. Now, as I mentioned before, everything does require one power supply, where the ones with the Sega CD and 32X built, or the Sega CD and the Genesis together, it's one power supply, and then the Genesis with the 32X built in is one power supply. Now, the Genesis with the 32X was never actually released. You might be able to find the one that was in the works, because they did have one in the works, but I don't know if it can be found or not. It would be very, very rare. I mean, it would be rare among rare. It'd be worth probably over $1,000. I wouldn't be surprised if it wouldn't go for, like, I don't know, probably like 5 or 10. It might even go up to like $5,000. I mean, it would be worth a lot because it's the only one. So, because that's what they had in the works, was pretty much what they had. Now they do have the multi-tap, so I mean you can still play. They still have. I don't know if they have any 4-player 32X games, but they do have. Some 4 and 6 players. I even got some that go up to 6 players for the Genesis, and I don't know how those work. But anyway, the issues with this was, the Sega Genesis was aging, but as we all know, so was the Super at the time. Both systems were aging. The competition was kind of fading away. Where it was basically getting down to Nintendo and Sega. Now Sega went ahead and released the 32X to kind of keep the system around a little bit longer. Their biggest problem is they didn't get rid of the system. They needed to just move on, and Sega refused to do that. Nintendo was going to release a CD attachment for the Super, and it was going to be made by Sony and Nintendo. And Sony went ahead and jumped out and started working on their PlayStation, so the project was canceled. But Nintendo moved away from the Super Nintendo and was working on the Nintendo 64. Now, one thing about the 32X is, even though the 32X was in development, at the same time, the Sega Saturn was in development in Japan, while the 32X was in development in the US. So there was two systems in development at one time, and Sega was just trying to get the system to last longer. But I think, honestly, a lot of the games that are 32X, I think they could have converted them to 16, and they would have played just the same as they pretty much do on the 32X for the most part. I mean, there is a little bit of difference, but not much. I mean, unless you can find the games, it really ain't even worth buying. I mean, with me, I wanted it more or less to make my Genesis run smoother, but that was pretty much it. But anyway, that was Sega's vision and the issues. This concludes our review of the Sega 32X and Sega CD 32X.